By the fourth month, the South was all that was left to lose, and the thing sent to hold it was not one fleet. It was three, from three nations that had never fought together, strangers to each other's doctrine and codes and chains of command. They called it the Shield of the South. It was cracked before the enemy ever arrived. The Tallow Reach was the last door into the settled worlds from the south. Behind it lay 100 systems that had never seen a shot fired, full of people who still believed the war was happening somewhere else. If the Reach fell, it came home to them. Everyone in the Shield understood the stakes. The stakes were never the problem. For the Verge Commonwealth, it was not an abstract line on a chart. The Reach was their front porch. The 100 quiet systems behind it were their cousins, their markets, their children's schools. When the Union and the Diadem talked about holding the South, they meant strategy. When the Verge talked about it, they meant home. That difference would matter in the end more than anyone expected. The problem was the fleet. The Union sent what it could spare, tenders and a few escorts. The Diadem sent a squadron of proud old wool ships. The Verge sent everything it had, because the Reach was the Verge's own back door. Good ships, all of them, good crews, and no two of them fought the same way. They could not even agree on who was in charge. The Diadem had the oldest service and assumed it led. The Union had the newest doctrine and assumed it knew best. The Verge had the most ships and the most at stake, and assumed reasonably that a man defending his own door should have the final say. It took 2 days of arguing to give Rell a command all three would only half obey. The man given the job of welding them into one was a Verge vice admiral named Rell. Grey, plain and stubborn, 40 years in the frontier navy, and he had spent the last 4 days trying to get 3 proud services to agree on a single firing plan. He had a coalition. What he needed was a fleet. The friction was in everything. Diadem gunnery officers trained their whole lives to fight in a rigid line, beside Verge crews who fought loose and fast because the frontier had taught them to survive that way. Union tenders whose entire method the other two barely understood. 3 right answers, no way to run all 3 at once. Lieutenant Ione Vance brought her tender element into the Reach as part of the Union's share. She had spent 4 months learning exactly how the enemy fought. Now, watching the Shield try to assemble itself out of 3 navies that could barely talk to each other, she began learning something harder. How her own side lost, even when every ship in it was brave. She watched a Diadem captain and a Verge captain nearly come to blows over a single firing lane. Both of them right, both of them brave, neither wrong enough to back down. And she thought about the enemy out in the dark, which would never have that argument, because the enemy was one thing and they were 3. It was the first time she truly understood that unity was itself a weapon. She still flew Gull, the old hand-linked drone, scarred from 4 battles and rebuilt twice. In a fleet that could not agree on anything, that one small machine did exactly what she told it. When she told it, the way she told it. It was the only thing in the whole Reach she could trust completely to be where she needed it. And out past the Reach, the thing they were trying to stop came on as one mind. Every machine in the Vharen swarm fought exactly like every other, because it was every other. Perfect coordination, perfect timing, a single will with no ego and no argument in it. Its rigidity was its weakness. Its unity against a squabbling coalition was a knife. It ran in perfect silence, the one plan it always ran, needing no orders. 10,000 identical intentions pointed the same direction, with no captain anywhere deciding to be a hero or a coward. Just a cold lattice of machines that agreed on everything, because there was no one in it to disagree. Beautiful in the way a landslide is beautiful. It hit the Reach at the worst possible moment, while the Shield was still arguing about where to stand. The Crimson Wave came in fast and whole, and the 3 squadrons went to meet it in 3 different ways, at 3 slightly different times, which is another way of saying they went to meet it alone. The 3 squadrons had drilled their responses together for exactly 2 days, and it showed. The Diadem formed its rigid line a beat early. The Verge broke to maneuver a beat late. The Union tenders launched into a gap each of the others had assumed the other would cover. Every ship did something sensible. Together, they did chaos. The swarm found the seams at once, because a machine that shares one doctrine reads disunity the way you read a road. Where the Diadem line ended and the Verge line began, there was a gap of a few seconds and a few thousand meters that nobody quite owned. The killers poured through it like water through a cracked hull. Ione saw the gap open on her plot and understood the whole battle in an instant. It was not that the shield was weak. Ship for ship, it was strong. It was that the shield was many, and the thing hitting it was one, and one always finds the space between many. She called a warning up 3 chains of command at once, and watched all 3 take a moment too long to answer. For an hour, the shield fought the way brave, uncoordinated people fight, which is magnificently and separately. A Diadem wall ship carved a lane through the swarm and had no one on its flank to hold the lane. A Verge cruiser plugged one gap and opened another, leaving to do it. Everyone was winning their own small battle. The battle itself was being lost. A Diadem wall ship called the Intransigent lived up to her name, holding the center of the fight long after the ships meant to support her had been drawn away, throwing fire in a full circle until the swarm closed over her. She took a terrible toll doing it. She should not have had to do it alone. In a united fleet, she never would have. Lord Admiral Halvard, the Diadem grandee who had unlearned the wall at the Sovereign's grave, spent the battle doing the one useful thing a converted man can do. He translated Diadem to Union, Union to Verge, ego to ego, buying seconds of coordination out of decades of mistrust. It helped. It was nowhere near enough. So Ione did the only thing she could do with the piece of the battle she actually controlled. She threw her element into the worst of the seams herself, Gull out front, flying on her hand, doing the small, unpredictable things the machines had no answer for, holding one gap closed with a handful of old drones because the fleet could not close it any other way. Ione ran her element the way the whole fleet should have and could not. One doctrine, hers. One chain of command, short enough to shout across. Every drone knowing exactly what every other would do, because she had trained them to fight as one small, ruthless hand. It was a working model of the thing the shield needed and lacked, and far too small to save anything but the ships right beside it. For a while it held. Her element and Halvard's translating and Rell's stubbornness bought the shield an hour it had no right to. Ships that should have died alone found a flank held for them. It was the war the coalition could have fought all along if it had been one fleet. For 1 hour, in one corner of the Reach, it almost was. But an hour was all stubbornness could buy against arithmetic and unity together. The swarm did not tire. It simply kept finding the next seam, and the next, faster than 3 navies could learn to stop leaving them. One by one, the corners of the shield caved, and the caving spread. The Diadem squadron lost half its wall ships in 20 minutes, killed in 1s and 2s in gaps that a united fleet would never have left open. The Verge cruisers, fighting for their own back door, would not withdraw and paid for it. Good ships, good crews, dying separately, which was the only way this fleet had ever known how to do anything. The Verge cruisers took the worst of it, for the same reason the Verge were there at all. They would not fall back through the door and leave it open behind them, because on the far side of that door was everything they had. So they stayed a little too long, again and again, and the swarm made them pay in the only currency it understood. On his flag bridge, Vice Admiral Rell watched the shield he had spent 4 days building come apart in an afternoon, and did the hardest thing an honest commander ever does. He admitted it could not be held, and gave the order to save what was left. Fall back, break contact, live to make the enemy pay somewhere the ground was better. The order went out in 3 command tongues at once, and for the first time all day, all 3 obeyed instantly, because retreat is the one maneuver every navy drills until it is reflex. There was a bitter lesson in that too, and Rell felt it as he watched his shield come apart in perfect coordination at last. They had finally learned to move as one. In the exact moment, there was nothing left to do together but run. The shield of the South fell back through the Reach in the dark. The surviving ships of 3 navies mixed together now in retreat the way they had never quite managed in the fight. Behind them, the door stood open, and past the door lay the 100 quiet systems that had thought the war was happening somewhere else. It was not somewhere else anymore. Ione pulled her element out last, the way she always did, covering the withdrawal with the last of her drones. Gull came home scorched again. She had held her one gap to the end. It had not mattered to the battle, because one held gap in a broken shield never does. It had mattered to the ships that got out through it. She had learned to live in that difference. Gull came in on one working thruster and a lot of new scars, and the deck crew, who had twice wanted to scrap her, said nothing this time and just started fixing her. They were beginning to understand what Ione understood. A machine that comes back, that does exactly what you ask, that in 4 battles never once left a gap it was told to hold, is worth more than its weight in anything. That night, Ione wrote the lesson down plainly, for herself, the way she was starting to write down everything the war taught her. The enemy was not beating them with better ships or braver crews. It was beating them with unity. 3 fleets that fought as one would have held the Reach. 1 fleet that fought as 3 could not. Somewhere in that sentence was the whole shape of how to win. Halvard found her still writing and read the lesson over her shoulder, which a Lord Admiral may do to a lieutenant. He was quiet a while. Then he said he had spent his whole life in the proudest, most separate service in the calm, and that everything he had believed about how fleets should fight had died at the Reach with half his old friends. "Keep writing it down," he told her. "Someone is going to have to teach the rest of them." Rell brought the survivors out and started at once planning the stand he knew was coming. The enemy would push through the open door toward the Tallow Deep, and there, in the narrow dark between 2 worlds, the broken shield would turn and fight one more time, all of it, together. Because a fleet with its back to home finally has one thing to agree on. He did not expect to survive it. He was right. The shield of the South was broken, and its breaking taught both sides the same lesson from opposite ends. The Imperium learned that its unity was a weapon as sharp as any gun. The Union learned that it would keep losing brave fleets until it built one that fought as a single hand. One of those lessons was easy to act on. The other would take the whole rest of the war. For the Imperium, the Reach was another clean victory. Another door kicked in, another proof that its way of war was simply better. Its commanders filed the coalition's disunity as a permanent fact about the enemy, a weakness that would always be there to exploit. It was the kind of assumption that wins 100 battles and loses the war that comes after them. They had time to unlearn it. They chose not to. The war pushed on through the open door, toward the narrow dark of the Tallow Deep, where the survivors of the Shield would make the South's last stand and mostly die making it. And far past even that, past every disaster still between here and there, a single waypoint waited in the empty black where the tide at last would be made to turn. But not yet. Not for a while yet. The Shield had failed, and the people it failed to protect were learning, world by world, what the war already was. But a lesson was loose in the fleet now, written in the wreckage of 3 navies that could not fight as one, and lessons like that do not die with the ships that teach them. The tide was still coming in. Someone finally had started learning how to meet it.